This is a 1990 Ford Sierra 1.8 GL, and it's a car that epitomises the 80s in a way no supercar can. It's the car for Mr. Average. Today I'm going to talk about the history of the Sierra, then I'm going to have a walk around and finally see how it stacks up against its 80s competition. The Ford Sierra was unveiled in September 1982, replacing the Ford Cortina, and marked a radical shift in one of the most conservative markets, and the large family car would never look the same again, thanks to the ultra-aerodynamic shape, giving the Sierra its nickname, the Jelly Mould. Ford started working on a replacement for the Mark V Cortina from about 1978, and attempted to create a new image for its offering in this segment. The last Cortinas weren't exactly modern or advanced, and by introducing the new name, Sierra, along with the sleek new shape, Ford hoped they would be able to revitalise their range. Now let's have a look at the design, and there's no better place to start than with the Jelly Mould itself. It's hard to see just how modern and different this car looked nearly 40 years ago, but if we take the Mark V Cortina as a baseline, yeah, that's how different. Seriously, this car looked very futuristic for 1982, and as I've said, the reason for this departure was aerodynamic gains. The Sierra had a drag coefficient of 0.34, which isn't fantastic by modern standards, but the Cortina's coefficient was 0.45. We're talking astronomical gains here. But this isn't the kind of thing Ford would do. They build average, normal cars, not cutting edge. If you wanted cutting edge, you went to Citroën. And in fact, there were only two cars on the market when the Sierra was being developed that beat this. They were the Porsche 928 and the Citroën GS. Even more interestingly, when they were developing the Sierra, they had the drag coefficient down to 0.25 thanks to sculpted door mirrors and Citroën-esque rear wheel covers. But Ford, as usual, weren't stupid and thought that this would be way too far considering the kind of people that were buying the Cortina at the time. As a compromise, early Sierras could be spec'd with flush wheel trims for that extra slipperiness. The Cortina to Sierra jump was definitely revolution rather than evolution. Now, as much as I think the Sierra is a really good looking car, the front end is a little bit fussy, and the reason I think that is because it was facelifted and changed so many times throughout its life that it seems to me as if Ford weren't quite sure how to make it look. The rest of the car looks fantastic, and this facelifted Sierra is, in my opinion, the best looking, even better looking than the Cosworths with the grille at the front here. And as you may have noticed, this car has some choice modifications, including Escort Cosworth wheels that are worth way more than the car's worth. And it shouldn't have the rear spoiler, but I just think it sets off the car so much better. This large hatch area, the large glass area, and then a little lip here on the end, I think makes the car look a little bit too flat without the wing on the back. That's not to say I think they're bad looking, but I just think it looks better with the wing on the back. And in 1985, Ford were forced to put these little fins on the back of the rear windows here because there were concerns about the stability of the Sierra in crosswinds. And to be honest, I think they give a little bit of an extra line to the car that complements the style. And of course, there's a big exhaust as well. Not quite big enough, but big nonetheless. And this Sierra doesn't have the black tinted rear lights like the very late ones did. This is just before they changed that. I think they changed that over in 1992. This is a 1990. This is a second facelift or Mark III Sierra, the last iteration of the Jelly Mould, in production between 1990 and 1993, when it was replaced by the front-wheel drive Mondeo. There aren't that many differences from a Mark II, but the headlamps are different, the rear end is slightly different, but the Mark II is very different from the Mark I, which had, I suppose, more of a utilitarian appearance. Up-spec models got a flush front end, quite close to the one on this Mark III Sierra, but lower models got a proper grille at the front, and basic models even got unpainted black plastic. One of the first things you'll notice about this Sierra when comparing it to the Cortina is that it now comes with a hatchback, and of course all the practicality benefits that brings. But buyers were initially sceptical, as they were when the Rover SD1 was launched in 1976, and that was part of the reason that led to Ford introducing the Orion. From 1987, however, there was a 4-door saloon version offered, known as the Sapphire. Other variants included a 3-door, which is quite odd considering the size of the car, but it looks good, and an ever-practical 5-door estate. This array of body styles was supplemented by an enormous range of specs, from 1.3 litre models with no wheel trims and that black plastic nose, all the way up to a 2.3 litre V6 with electric everything. Then of course, you've got the XR4s and the Cosworths. And now that I've escaped from the torrential rain, it's really comfy in here, it's lovely. The velour seats are really nice, there's this pattern on them, I'll show you a bit better in a minute. And if we do the door slam test, that doesn't sound too cheap at all. That sounds quite well made, despite the fact there are keys in the pocket which make it rattle a little bit more. It's quite nice. I do think the instruments in the Sierra are really quite nice. You get a tachometer on the left and a speedometer on the right, all pretty standard. Although the tachometer, I suppose, is quite nice for a car of this era. But you get a fuel gauge with actual numbers on for the amount of litres of fuel you've got. And of course, coolant temperature. And you get a small selection of warning lights along the bottom, but early Sierras also had warning lights along here, I think. But they aren't here on this one. Instead, you have a cassette holder. Now here you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cassettes here. And in the centre armrest, you have space for another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cassettes. So you can hold 11 cassettes in a Sierra. That isn't bad going, Ford. That is not bad going. But of course you can't play those cassettes in here because it's got a tacky mid-2000s, well, early 2000s really, JVC head unit in that plays CDs. Now Richie, the owner of this car, does have the original cassette deck, so that might end up going back in the car. But anyway, back to the instruments. You also have a digital clock in the middle, and to the right you have heated rear window control, fog lamp control. And those buttons, they don't feel the best quality. They feel very shallow, almost. Not as good quality as the switches on my Metro, but then again, I do think that's a really quite well put together car. Shock, I know. Let's test the horn. That's not bad actually, that's pretty good. And the indicator warning sound. No idea whether you can hear that or not, but it's alright, not too bad. Now, when the Sierra was first launched, Ford made a big deal about the wraparound cockpit feel of the interior, as this centre section here is angled towards the driver. And from the driver's point of view, it does feel very nice. Yes, everything is pointed towards you and it feels like a cockpit. But I think that takes away from the passenger's experience of the car. I'd much rather have a flatter dashboard that enables the passenger to access things a bit better. The heater controls, for example, are up here, and they're normal heater controls. They're very similar to the heater controls on my Metro, but they are very far away from the passenger, and the fan switch is down here, which feels very good quality actually, but it all feels a little bit secluded. It all feels a little bit out of view for the driver and too far away for the passenger. Down here you have another cubby hole. You have your cigarette lighter and of course your ashtray, which has just fallen out of my hand. Old pound coin there. And if you're wondering what these are lumbar adjustment for the seats, I believe. I'm pretty sure they are anyway. And that's a feature that is really quite nice for, as much as this is a high spec car, it is a GL. That's a really nice feature in 1990. Even if the controls are a little bit bulky and in the way, but I think they can, yes, they can fold down below the seats there. 5-speed gearbox in this model, which feels, it doesn't feel very nice to be honest. And I was surprised, I thought this gearbox would feel a lot nicer than it does. But there's a very long throw between the gears. Exceptionally long throw, yeah, you're pretty much on the floor there in 4th gear. And 5th, and push to reverse or slam across reverse, there you go. And there's reverse. And below the gear lever you have electric window controls. but only in the front, keep fit in the back. You have another little storage area, probably the perfect size for an iPhone, very forward thinking there. And your handbrake, and then of course, that cassette storage I was talking about. Now, I'm surprised. I don't know whether this car's had a new dashboard or new doors or whatever, but grey dashboard, blue door cards. But the trim on the doors is the same as the trim on the seats, so I don't know, but that seems to be a little bit odd. They're very nice, but a little bit odd nonetheless. And on the doors you have an armrest here in plastic and a door pull, which feels like it's going to fall off. A little cubby hole there and your speaker. And up on the dashboard on the passenger side you have this big storage area here, which as much as it's not very tall, so you couldn't fit very much in there, it is quite deep. And of course underneath it you have your glove box, which is bigger than I expected. That's quite nice. Here's something that's brilliant. Central locking, fantastic. Yes, if we look at the stalks, we have indicators on this side, very small, very slender stalks, and your flash, and I'd assume, yep, there's your main beam. Very slender stalks, they feel quite well made, very solid, much more solid than Austin Rover ones do in the Montego. I don't know about the Cavalier, because I've never actually been in a Cavalier of this age, but I can say that these feel quite a lot nicer than the Austin Rover stalks. And on the other side you have your wipers, which is, I'd assume, wash, and there's your speeds, and that is intermittent I think, and your rear one is there, and then your rear wash I believe. And then your lights are on another stalk behind the wiper stalks. There's side lights and your headlights. Should we do a test of the rear wiper? I think we might as well. So, ignition, if I can get ignition, there you go. Yes, it works. That's brilliant. Up top we have a sunroof. Yay, my favourite thing in any car. Of course I'm not going to open it, it is one of the twisty ones because it's pouring down and I'm going to get absolutely soaked if I do. But you have, this is terrible camera work here, but you have your interior light, and if I flip the camera around you have sun visors, but nothing on the driver's side, no flap for any parking tickets or anything like that. But on the passenger side you do get a mirror and grab handles all around, even on the driver's side here, but none in the back on that side. I know what's happened, yeah. This here has a hook on it, so I'm going to guess that Richie, the owner of this car, swapped them around so that he can have a grab handle on this side and put the blanking plugs in the back there. One thing I thought I'd mention is there isn't actually very much footroom here, because as much as the seat comes out to here, the transmission tunnel is enormous, and obviously it needs a transmission tunnel for this car's rear wheel drive, but there's a lot of intrusion into the foot space there, which I'm a little bit disappointed with, but I suppose you're going to have to live with that with a rear wheel drive car. And I almost forgot, electric mirrors. Look at that. They work as well. Now I've escaped from the rain again and come in the back of the Sierra, and there's more space than I thought there was. There's quite a bit of headroom, but then again I'm only short, I'm only 5'9", 5'10", so maybe if you're 6 foot you might have some issue. But the seats are very, very comfortable. You do get, if I can get it down, oh there you go, it's even got a courtesy flap there to stop you from seeing the metal on the folding rear seat. But you do get an armrest, so I'm very comfortable here in the back of the Sierra. There's enough leg room as well, if I just get the camera around and show you that. There's enough leg room. That seat isn't set for me, it's set for someone slightly taller than me, but you know. And there is a map pocket on both sides. But of course, keep fit windows in the back. And you do get, again, ashtrays on either side with a little metal thing to stub your cigarette out on. Again, are the kids smoking cigarettes? Also, are they smoking more cigarettes than the adults? Because there's one on both sides. Why not just have a single ashtray in the middle? But no, Ford decided they needed them on both sides. That just strikes me as really, really odd. But you do get comfy rear headrests. They're quite nice. Snug. It is a snug place to be here. It's the kind of car that I'd feel perfectly happy to sit in on a really long journey. It's comfier than quite a lot of cars actually. I'm genuinely surprised sitting in the back of this car how reclined and comfortable I feel. Oh, it turns out the kids are smoking. There's a burn there. Mechanically, however, the Sierra was slightly less impressive. Engines were perfectly acceptable in 1982, but by 1987 they were a little bit long in the tooth and they were replaced. Vauxhall and Austin Rover had pushed engine technology way beyond the Sierra, so Ford were trying to keep the Sierra feeling modern to drive, with the new engines being lighter, more economical and more powerful. Diesel engines were also becoming more important in the late 80s, and the Sierra got a new turbo diesel unit, much improved from the old one, but it still wasn't quite as good as the Citroën BX and Peugeot 405. The front end consisted of McPherson struts straight from the old Cortina, but with an anti-roll bar, and the rear end, which was now independent, is from the Granada of the time, with trailing wishbones and coil springs making the rear end a little more composed with the rear drive layout of the Sierra. That's part of the reason why people love these cars up until this day, purely for fun on wet roundabouts. Certainly, the Vauxhall Cavalier and the Austin Ambassador, and then later the Montego, were all front-wheel drive by this point, and sure, that meant the Sierra had less space inside and was a little bit more old-fashioned, but it was simple, and that's what Ford does well. Simple. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work at first. Ford really struggled to shift the modern-looking car in a rather conservative market, and introduced the Orion, a posher saloon version of the Escort, to compensate. At one point, there was even media speculation that Ford may reintroduce the old Cortina. Gradually, the public started to come around to the styling, and other manufacturers started to introduce their new models, which were more aerodynamic and closer to the style of the Sierra. The Ford marketing machine worked its magic, and as usual, it all ended up being a wild success. The Sierra ended up as the best-selling car in its class in 1983, 86, 87, 88 and 89. They stopped selling the Sierra in 1993, and in every year the Sierra wasn't the bestseller, the Vauxhall Cavalier was. It easily outsold the Austin Montego due to that car's perceived quality issues and poor image. Although all things considered, I would have the Montego, but then again, I am a bit weird. Apart from the standard models like this one, there were a few performance models as I've alluded to. First the XR4i, then the XR4x4 with four-wheel drive as the name suggests, and then the RS Cosworth, and finally the full-fat RS 500 Cosworth. I'm not going to go into any more depth than that on the hot models, as I'd like to do a separate video on those models in the future. This particular Sierra has the 1.8 litre CVH engine, making 79 brake horsepower. From my experience going out in this car, it's not as rough as a lot of people seem to say. It seems quite a nice little engine. Maybe slightly underpowered for a 1.8 litre engine, but it's quite tough as well. And the custom exhaust on this one has a really nice burble to it, but isn't too intrusive when you just want to settle down to a cruise. Overall, I think the Sierra might be a little bit too forgotten. Yes, they're very popular, but the RS variants are the ones that people really look at. But here is a completely run-of-the-mill car that's simple and well designed, but it had the showroom appeal in both style and spec that made it a runaway success despite relatively good opposition. The Ford Sierra is a motoring institution that's beginning to fall out of our national consciousness. That's partly due to scrappage schemes, and partly due to it being so ubiquitous that we just didn't notice it driving away. Now we look back and wonder, where the bloody hell did all the Sierras disappear to? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, then please consider liking the video and subscribing for more. I'll see you soon.